Hello and a very warm welcome back to the garden. I'm currently doing a big beetroot harvest and harvesting all sorts at the moment, and we've had a lot of windy weather. In fact, some people are saying that it's the windiest it's been in August for decades, and there hasn't been too much damage. The biggest thing has been the runner bean structure being blown over, but nothing that we can't mend. And recently I've done a video about how to get more out of your harvests, but today I wanted to make a video about how we managed to make this year the most productive year yet, and what I think are the 7 instrumental skills that have really contributed to that. The first skill is arguably the most important one, because it's all about soil and soil health. Because when you have a healthy soil, it does so much of the work for you. It helps control pest and disease issues, and also it provides vital organic matter for all of this soil life that is needed. And it really does, when you have a soil that is so full of life, it helps the plants uptake nutrients. And one of the easiest ways to improve soil health is to use a technique that I'm doing at the moment, which is just chop and drop, where you get your organic matter and you break it up into smaller pieces, and you kind of just spread it over the surface of the soil, and this will break down a lot quicker than if you put it directly into a compost bin, and provide that organic matter that's really going to help your soil life. There's also another really easy way to build soil health, and it's as you're clearing space. And what we want to do is remove all of the growth at the top, which you can of course chop and drop right there, but try and leave the roots in the ground wherever possible, because roots are the key food source for all of your microorganisms. And if there's always going to be roots in the ground, there's always going to be a food source for them. So you can do a kind of a double whammy, where as well as clearing and just leaving the roots underneath, you can then come back once it has been cleared and chop and drop all of this material back over the top, and that is the easiest way to build a healthy soil. One of the easiest ways to get bigger harvests from your garden, especially over the long term, is to make note of everything that goes well in the garden. So for example, you can write down the best performing varieties, particular planting dates that you found work better than others, also the spacings in between plants. Perhaps you find that growing them closer together ends up in providing more food. Also time-saving methods, things that you do that have perhaps shaved off 30 minutes that you can then invest somewhere else in the garden. And finally, those surprises where you think, oh, I've got to do that again. These kind of successes can then help guide you as you do your planting plan. For example, this year, parsley intercropped with runner beans did particularly well. And also, these runner beans were planted 2 weeks after all of the others, but they've actually overtaken them and are providing the best crops for us. And I think the reason why is because we've grown them up this IBC tank, which acts as a heat storage. So I'm going to then add that to my notebook as something to do again next year, because of just how effective this is. If you really start to record all of these positive successes and things that you've noticed that have led to bigger yields, then over time your garden is naturally going to become more productive. And this really does link in with the observe and interact skill. And you can check out this video to find out a little bit more about how this works. Another simple skill that has been key over the last few seasons that involves a notepad is by creating impact lists, and these have been game-changing for me. An impact list is simply a to-do list, but of jobs that are going to create the biggest impact in terms of giving you the biggest yields and harvest and productivity. So every time I go up into the garden, I like to think about what are the key jobs that are going to give me the biggest returns over a set period of time. For example, for now, I'd avoid weeding. That isn't that much of an impact because I'd rather focus my time on transplanting the rest of the leeks, which are going to result in higher yields in comparison to doing a bit of weeding. One of the simplest skills that absolutely any gardener can do is multi-sowing, and it's been made popular by Charles Dowding, and it's popular for a reason because it is so effective. The thing that I love the most is the fact that you don't need to waste any seeds. You just plant them in individual modules, transplant them, and let the plants grow apart from each other. And what this means is that if you only have limited space, you can grow a lot of plants, and it's a highly productive way of being able to grow a lot of things. Also, it means that you can start plants and seedlings off indoors, and you can transplant them after you've taken out another crop, such as utilising succession planting. And there are 4 key crops that I like to multi-sow. The first are obviously beetroot, radish as well is super effective, and turnips, any kind of veg like that, including swede. And I also find that multi-sowing peas is also super effective. Polyculture inspired planting is another fantastic skill to really improve and boost the harvest, and has really helped this garden. The first thing about polyculture planting is that whole idea of diversity, which I covered in the pest control video, because if you have lots of different things growing, it's harder for pests or disease to take over, and as a result, you're going to lose less crops. But the other thing is that polyculture really makes use of the space. So rather than having just one crop, polyculture looks at the different levels and gaps in between. So around the sides I can grow things like radish and beetroot, and then you've got the different kind of layers and heights. So we've got the tall runner beans, and then we've got other lower layers like the kale, and then underneath the runner beans we've got things like parsley. So rather than just having a few different crops, with polyculture and intercropping, we can use different space and different heights to our advantage to fit in more harvests. And without using polyculture, we'd just be missing out on opportunities to grow more food in the same space. The skill that I've been using a lot of, especially this year, and always gets me the most excited, is experimenting and not worrying about what the result is, so kind of throwing away the rule book and seeing what happens. I'll just give you a quick example here. This is a trombone squash, and it was this poor, sad looking thing, and I decided just to stick it in the corner of this raised bed to see what happens. Didn't expect much, but as you can see now, there are loads of fruits that have appeared, and it's looking really productive. So it's quite a shock. But had I not thought to put the squash at the corner of this bed, I might have really missed out on a lot of harvest here. And the second thing, just a quick side note, is that this has been grown in wood chips, and wood chip isn't really recommended as a mulch in the UK, mainly because of the slug issues. But it's worked really well this year and in other beds as well. So it's really good to know that. And again, this is just throwing away the rule book and testing for ourselves, because every single garden is slightly different, and some things might not work well in one position and work really well in a different position. Perhaps the biggest success from experimentation in this garden is just forgetting and throwing away the idea of crop rotation unless there is an issue like a soil-borne pest or a disease. The issue with crop rotation is that it's really limiting. So if you say grow one thing, you only have a limited number of plants that you can choose from to replace it. But if you forget about this, you actually have so much choice and flexibility. So for example, this bed was broad beans earlier this year, and the first thing that I've done is I planted more beans to follow them. And yes, I've got the leafy greens, which makes sense after broad beans, but I've also got things like beetroot and courgettes, which don't strictly follow the crop rotation of legumes. And had I not been following it, I wouldn't have been able to plant out these spare plants, and then I could have lost some productivity. The only way though for this to work well in terms of ignoring crop rotation is by focusing on soil health, and the tips in the first skill do that for you. And the final skill is a really simple one that you can just do year after year, and that's about adding some TLC to your raised beds towards the end of the growing season, ready for autumn and winter. So what I've done here is I've covered this raised bed with about an inch or two, so 2 to 5 centimetres of compost, and then at the moment there's black plastic. Now I usually wouldn't recommend black plastic, but we're using it because we have this material available, but you can use cardboard or compost instead. I've actually done a video on Patreon about why I'm already starting to put beds to sleep for autumn and winter in August, which shows a little bit more detail behind my thinking of that, so you can check that out. And there's loads more videos on there as well of other parts of the gardening and the behind the scenes. But there are just so many benefits to covering your raised beds like this. The first thing is that you're adding the organic matter. The covering stops any weeds from growing through, which means when it comes to spring, all you need to do is remove the covering or remove the top, and it's ready to plant straight into, which is exactly what you need after you've been waiting all winter to start some gardening. This skill is kind of the foundation skill that keeps this whole garden maintained, and it is something that I absolutely do every year. And stay tuned for a video later on in autumn where I'll cover this in a lot more depth and detail. So there we have the 7 skills that I think have made the biggest impact on helping this garden to become more productive. And I'm just harvesting some green coriander seeds to dry and also to use fresh in cooking, which is also a result of experimentation and just letting things go. So I hope you found this useful, and I'd be really keen to find out if there's any skills that you have in particular that have really helped to influence your garden to make it more productive. I'd love to hear it down below in the comments, and I look forward to seeing you guys again soon. Goodbye.
Okay, so what did people think about the
Dawn's
overall
got her
video?
hand up.
Okay, Dawn.
I think that I just realized why some strange young man showed up at the garden last fall and was taking all the cut grass from the fields, saying, "You need to cover those." And I'm like, "I don't know who you are, but what are you talking about?" He says, "You need to cover those and you need to put," and I'm like, "Well, I have a compost." And he says, "Yeah," he says, "You need to cover that too." And he covered all the gardens like this guy was doing. And I was like, now what am I going to do in the spring? Now I have a mess. So now I understand why he did it, to help protect it from the weeds and keep the soil strong. My soil's pretty weak after seeing what he just did. I can tell you that.
I just want to make sure everyone was sort of, because he was going over some terms that are like we haven't openly discussed before, like this multi-sowing.
Yeah.
So by that, he's dropping like bunches of seeds into the individual compartment as he's sowing. So he may put 4 lettuce seeds of 4 different varieties into one little plant cell, or same as he said with peas and radishes. I'm just wondering if anyone else has experimented with that multi-sowing technique.
No.
Okay. I'm going to give it a go this year. I think it's pretty interesting. I mean, we've seen often at the garden centers, you'll see the combinations of lettuce that they put together in one sort of.
Yeah.
Paulette, do you have a comment?
Well,
I
I was just going to say, it reminded me a little bit, although it's not the same as the square box gardening. The square box gardening where you put a lot in a small space. I know we had gotten some seeds mixed up with turnips at one point, and we planted them, and I think you have to be okay with a little bit of messy. That's all. You have to be okay with messy because, like, you know, the turnip was kind of overgrowing on top of the other items. So like, if you're okay with that, I think it's well worth the experiment.
And that leads into the idea of that polyculture as well. And by that, they mean sort of mixing the crops instead of having one square that's like all peas and one square that's all carrots. You're integrating, you know, different heights of vegetables and, you know, different vegetables that grow at different times as well. So has anyone tried any of that stuff?
So at Twin Forks, we tried like in some 4x8 beds last year. We had 2 rows of peas on the north side and 2 rows of beans on the north side. And then one of them had lettuce as the shorter crop on the south side. And then we planted cucumbers. But the cucumbers fought with the taller crops for space.
Yeah.
So we're probably going to go back to planting cucumbers just on their own in one bed this year, just because they're so sprawly and they cover the lettuce, they cover the. So that was an experiment that went, guess we shouldn't do that again. But the combination of the taller plants and we tried it in 2 or 3 different ways with spinach and lettuce, and that seemed to work out really well. They looked really healthy. So I don't know if they were protecting from the north wind or what it was, but we're going to do that again.
And Jared, you had a comment there. Go ahead, Jared. You're on mute. Hello?
Hold on. There we go.
There
That's
you
me.
are. Yeah.
Sorry about that. I always, at Zoom meetings, I mute myself because I absolutely hate people chatting in the background. What was I going to say? Yes, I think that what Rochelle just commented upon is exactly what this speaker was saying. It's absolutely critical to learn from one's mistakes and successes and to make notes. He has the advantage, of course, if his accent doesn't belie where he's coming from. He has a growing season that's at least twice as long as ours, and an abundant rain, so that there are a lot of things which are much easier there. But having said that, I was very impressed by the whole idea. As a composter, the idea of just chopping them up and leaving them on the beds has tremendous appeal. So I'll have to discuss that with my boss, but I think my boss is probably going to say, if you think it's worth doing, let's give it a try.
Yeah, for sure. That seems like a really good, especially even as you're harvesting, you know, just cutting off those carrot and beet tops and just putting them in there. Yeah, never even thought about that.
I could speak to that actually. So again, just be ready with the chop and drop. That it looks so lush and wonderful at first.
Yeah.
And everything will shrivel up and dry up. And if you're okay with like messy, you'll be fine with it. But it's like the first time you do it, if you're someone that likes a nice lined up, neat garden, you're going to be quite surprised when you go back and look 2 days later. But we did do chop and drop, and we started leaving the roots in the ground, in the boxes. Yeah.
What about then covering them with either cardboard or with plastic?
We didn't actually. We used, so the one year we had extra Meeker's mix and just put the Meeker's mix on top, and it was great. I didn't have weeds, I didn't have anything. And last year we used straw, and we just put straw all over the top, and like using what we have is kind of the idea.
May I?
Yes, Dawn, jump in
That,
there.
and that's exactly what that young fellow was doing for me. We didn't have, and he said, he made a mention of a few different things, but he said, we have fields of cut grass that will become what we need. And he very seldom talked, but when he did, it sounded very smart. And he did that. And I, in comment to the Neat Garden, when I first started the garden 6 years ago, I had them lined up. I had, you know, my watering section. It was always weeded and everybody made comments of it. But after seeing what he said by leaving the roots in and protecting the base and the health of the earth, I was probably killing it by keep doing what I was doing. May have looked good from the top, but it wasn't as healthy for the earth. And that's where the comment came in. If you can handle the disabled look of your garden, it's very
Yes.
healthy. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I was trained and grown up on a farm where everything had to look right. But now I'm thinking there's got to be a happy medium in there, because I'm working way too hard and I'm actually killing the earth, and are taking out its nutrients.
Yes.
And I wish I hadn't have done that now.
And on the note of the grass, so here's the thing, I cringe, and this may be wrong, but I cringe at putting grass on things, because my dad on the farm used to just pound home the fact that like grass will come alive from complete death. Do not ever put grass on your garden. So I know there's ways to get around that. I've read that you can just dry it all out and this and that, but I stop at the grass. I won't do the grass.
Well,
Dawn, you'll have to let us know. You'll have to let us know this, like report back once things start growing and tell us whether you have grass sprouting up or whether it works.
Well, I plan on taking a lot of it off because there's a lot. And then I'm thinking, do I turn it? Because there's juice in there, but I can't stand the smell of rotted grass either. So I'm like, you know, what's the worst of the two? So I'm kind of going to do a combination of, but I agree with the comments on the grass. You have to be really careful with it, because not only that, it reeks. If you don't have it dried out and you use it, and then it reeks, and it makes you wonder if you're rotting stuff, not growing stuff.
I've always used, my lawnmower has a bagger, so I always bag my grass, and I always spread that around in my gardens and in my flower beds. I've used it for years, and I find it's the best thing. Keeps the moisture in the ground, and actually your grass has a lot of moisture, so if you're putting it around your plants, like never right against the plant itself, you give it some space, but it adds moisture to the soil. And then when you're tilling your soil a little bit, it just amends really well, and you don't get that smell if you don't like put a thick layer. And the rest goes into my composters, and it really helps with the compost.
That's good to know.
And I think this idea of recording your successes, and it would be really awesome if all of us as community gardeners could maybe just, you know, try to think of that this year. And if we could each come up with 1 or 2 things that we found in our experimentation really worked, and we could maybe report back, that would be really great. Because that thing, even using like his big water tank and having the beans grow up the side, or cucumbers or whatever, like that's a brilliant idea in terms of, you know, extending the season a bit. Rochelle, I see you have a question. Yeah,
I just wanted to comment on the grass thing. So I had read at one point in time that grass was fine as long as you didn't layer it so thickly that it became slimy and moldy.
That's right.
So all you have to do is just watch. And if it looks like it's starting to go that way, to kind of spread it out so that it dries out a little bit. And I haven't done it on my vegetable garden beds, but I do that all the time with my flower beds, and it's great.
Wow.
okay, well, being sort of cognizant of time and how much time we need for the meeting, does anyone have anything else they want to add? We'll wrap things up.
There's it's called trenching. What you do is like in the boxes, but we've experimented with the last 2 years, and it seems to really be successful, especially for plants like squash and cucumbers is you dig down maybe 6 inches and you fill it with compost, and then you plant on either side of it. And that has been really successful. So let's say you're using your garden box. In the middle of the garden box, you create a trench, you fill it with compost that's not degraded yet, and you plant on either side of it. And we've had a lot of success with that, especially with like squash and cucumbers. So you're feeding your plants with your compost while it decomposes. So it's a really good idea.
Yes, that sounds great.
Okay, so
Charmaine?
we'll just wrap up.
Just
Sorry?
real quick. Charmaine, do you think that it's the trenching that is working, or are you like hilling those plants?
Pardon me?
Do you think it's your method of trenching that improved your plants, or is it that you're hilling the plants like you would hill potatoes?
No, we're not hilling the plants whatsoever. So it's whatever is in the compost is what's creating the energy for the soil.
Okay,
Eating
good,
them.
Mhm.
good.
Okay, thank you all. That was great. Back to you, Rochelle.